If you've, not traveled overseas, it's possible that some of you may not actually realize just how good a country we live in is. Australia has been a great country, and it has had so much to offer its people in the past. And, I say in the past because we are at serious risk of having all of that changed. In fact, much has already changed. Like some of you, I have lived in several different countries, and I frankly don't know anywhere else that I would rather be. And I'm not just being patriotic about that. I really mean that. That's not to say that I don't like other countries, because I do, and there are certainly other great countries to live in. I just don't think that they are better than Australia. Now, we live in one of the most educated countries in the world. We have a taxpayer-supported higher education system that's the envy of many other countries, Western countries especially, and also we've got a great free medical care system, and frankly, we've got one of the best climates in the world as a bonus. However, as much as Australia has to offer, it doesn't take a degree in sociology to recognize that we are actually in serious trouble where it counts the most, and that's where the family unit is concerned. Families are the core of any society, and in this core, we really are in serious trouble. Laws are being changed that erode that traditional value of family. We, like our friends over in America, we have normally referred to the traditional family as one mom, one dad, one marriage, and children that came from that one family. For centuries, that's what the family was considered as. However, today, only 1 out of 6 people in America fit into that category. And you know what? Our statistics are not really that far behind from America. The other 83% of people come from a variety of other situations other than the traditional family. The modern traditional Western family is simply no longer the typical family of my own parents' generation and yours too. In the last 40 years, the family in our kind of society has taken some really hard knocks. Let's consider some of the dramatic changes that have taken place since, say, back to 1960, soon after I arrived on planet Earth. There has been a 400% increase in the divorce rate, and a 200% increase in the number of children who are now raised in a single-parent home. Some years ago, we had as many as 150 kids that came to our youth group here on a Friday night, and the great majority of these kids came from local unchurched families. And sadly, the majority of those families were missing a biological father. Now, I know how hard it is raising children, even when there's 2 of you doing it, and how hard it can be even when you've got a reasonable income. So how much harder will it be for single parents with limited incomes? Sadly, there are families all around us that are struggling to just simply make ends meet. Let's take a quick look at some statistics that point out what is actually going on in our neighborhoods and in this country. These days, 63% of Australian partnered or married mothers and 38% of single mothers with preschool children aged are working outside the home. In other words, they're leaving home to go somewhere to work. With children under 15, the rate of working mothers climbs to 71%. For partnered mothers and 65% for solo mothers. Now, this is what's happening in the wider community, and I know that perhaps in the church those figures would be lower. But we're outliners these days. We're not the majority anymore. We're actually outliners. And so we can't go by just what's happening in the church, although to an extent this also happens in the church, but in the wider community, these are the reality statistics. And interestingly, our statistics are almost identical to the American ones. And I guess at the end of the day, Americans, apart from their accent, they're not all that different from us. Now, this figure jumped from 59% to 71% since our government introduced the child care tax rebate back in 2004. Working solo moms jumped from 50% to 65%. Did we have such a shortage of labor in our country that the government needed to encourage mothers to enter the labor force? Or did they, in their, confounded wisdom, think that young children were better off in daycare rather than at home with their mothers? If our government really cared about our children, instead of giving all that money to daycare centers, they could instead be giving mothers that money so they could stay home. But you know what? That would be way too good of a godly idea, wouldn't it? Now, I couldn't get an Aussie statistic for this one, but in the US, 80% of school-aged children come home each day to an empty house. What are those kids doing while home alone? As I said, it doesn't take a social psychologist to recognize that the deterioration of the once traditional family has really taken its toll on the emotional well-being of millions of children around the world, and especially the Western world. As we know, these days kids have access to a wide range of learning and learning input devices that many of us older ones just simply didn't have as children. Now, while this can be a good thing, it is also has the very real potential of being very negative. When I was a kid, climbing a tree and not falling off was just real fun and a real buzz. Anyone else used to think climbing trees was good? Oh, the girls in the house were into climbing trees too. I'm sure you did. So, but you know what? Today's average kid would ask you, why would I want to climb a tree? Seriously. You ask the average kid, do you want to climb a tree? Why? And why would they? When they could play incredibly addictive and engaging games like Call of Duty or Fortnite on their PlayStation or Xbox, or use an iPad to, FaceTime with friends in some other part of the world, or keep up with each other through Facebook, or maybe just browse away on their mobile phones. Who would want to climb trees when you can do that? I now have 9 grandchildren, and while they are all absolutely great kids, I tend to remember more things about the first one. And I guess it was the novelty factor, my first grandchild. And so she was very special, still is, of course. Anyway, when Ariel was hardly 18 months old, she knew how to turn on the air conditioner. She knew how to turn on the TV and change channels. She knew that white remotes make the room cool and black ones make the TV screen come on. She knew how to swipe pages on my iPad, and she loved to visit her granddad at the office because of his laptop, which she always gravitated to and insisted on interacting with using both the mouse and the keyboard. Even at that early age, she was becoming a true geek. And you know what? She's not alone. Most toddlers these days in our country are being exposed to the same technology that is turbocharging their learning capacities and experiences. And on the surface, this is all good. I mean, we all want our children to be quick and smart, and all these gadgets will help them sharpen their intelligence. So we are all for it, but all is not good in the modern family unit. And generally speaking, the potential outcomes for kids these days are just simply not getting better than what they used to when I was a kid. You know, when I was about 10 years old, we lived in a part of Montreal in Canada that had terraced apartment buildings, kind of like this. I used to sometimes climb up the fire escapes, as you see on the right there, and then walk on the roofs of people's houses instead of on the sidewalks. Walking on the sidewalk was boring. Walking on roofs just seemed to be really exciting. I thought that was so much fun. And then one day I did this with a friend. And he thought chucking stones down people's chimneys would be even more fun. And I confess I felt really bad and guilty about doing that. For me, that was kind of like being really bad. And most kids at the time would probably have thought that that was doing something really bad. And that was in or around 1968. In 1946, a poll was taken of American high school teachers asking them to name the top offenses that their students committed. The major offenses were these: talking in class, chewing gum, making noises, running in halls, getting out of turn in line, wearing improper clothing, and not putting waste paper in the rubbish bins. Seriously, I don't know how teachers survived the stress back in those days. I mean, those teenagers were just out of control. Fancy throwing rubbish, not throwing them in the bin. And you know what? I remember these offenses because it was pretty much the same in my school even 20 years after this poll was taken. But, here's the big but, 65 years later, in 2011, guess what the top offenses being committed by the same aged American teenagers in the same schools were? In order of occurrence: rape, robbery, assault, burglary, arson, murder, and suicide. That's what the teachers were reporting were the worst crimes that the kids were doing in their school. As you can see, multi-literacies, technology, and learning inputs may, be diversifying and speeding up the learning capacities of our kids, but things are not getting better. And we certainly have our work cut out for us as parents. The answer starts in the home. I have no doubt about that. But the question is, how can we have happy, biblically functioning homes in a world like ours? Because as soon as our children leave the home, they're exposed to all kinds of nonsense that you don't even know about. Well, thankfully, the book of Proverbs helps us out a little bit in this area. And the first key ingredient for a happy home is to establish a strong marriage. Before I say anything else, I know that some of you wish that you actually had a person to establish a marriage with. And so to you, I say, be patient. God is working on you and preparing you so that you don't mess it up when you do find the right girl or fellow. Some of our younger ones aren't here today, so they're not hearing what they need to hear. But anyway, so be it. I know that some of you may also be divorced, and some may be separated, and others might just simply be having real struggles in your current marriage. And what I'm going to say is not, meant to offend or condemn anyone in any way, but simply to convey what the ideal may be for having a happy home life from a biblical perspective. If you're not in that situation, then please remember that through Christ all things are possible, including the healing and restoration of your marriage. So at least perhaps you might want to take note, if not for yourselves, maybe to help one of your friends. Take note of the principles that I'm going to share and do your best to adopt them to your own personal circumstances, or maybe help your kids or whatever. After raising 5 kids with the same one wife who is still willing to put up with me, I will confess that I am still not an expert. But after 44 years of marriage, I have learned a thing or two. I wish I knew it all. Or rather, I wish I knew what I know today at the start of my marriage, but I didn't. And you know what? No one seemed to be able to help me or tell me either. And so let me give both of those who are hoping to get married soon and those who are already married a few keys to help establish a strong marriage. The first one is that to stay strong, you have to stay captivated by your spouse. Now, men, especially those with easily distracted imaginations, I need to warn you that I'm about to read a verse that has the word breasts in it. So I'm telling you this ahead of time so that you won't get distracted thinking about them and then miss the rest of the message. Okay? So let's go to Proverbs 5:18 and 19. Let your wife be a fountain of blessing for you. Rejoice in the wife of your youth. She is a loving deer, a graceful doe. Let her breast satisfy you always. May you always be captivated by her love. Now, I realize that this is kind of speaking, of husbands to wives, but the principle is the same the other way around. He says, may you always be captivated by her love. You could easily say by his love. Now, instead of captivated, the New King James says ravished. The New American Standard Bible says exhilarated. The New King James says enraptured. And the New Revised Standard Version says intoxicated. I mean, they're all very charged up words. Is your spouse doing that for you? Is he ravishing, exhilarating, enraptured, I should say, and intoxicating? Is your spouse doing that for you? Either way, I think this is what the Scripture's saying. That as a spouse, we need to make a choice to stay captivated. Remember how you felt just before you got married. Make a choice to find and value joy in your relationship with your spouse and revel in that joy, whatever it is. Make a joint commitment to do this. Find some common interests and passions and engage in them regularly. When I first started dating Bernie, I deserved to be fired from my job. I was managing a restaurant, and I kid you not, I would just sneak off all the time to just go and say hello. If a customer rang up and complained about something, I'd say, no worries, I will drop off a new batch for you. And I'd jump in the car and I'd go via Bernie's. 44 years later, I don't know if I feel that same way. But why? Why does that happen? Why don't we feel the same way years later? It's the same girl, it's the same guy. Anyway, my point is, be captivated by, whatever dimension of your marriage relationship that provides that mutual sense of exhilaration and satisfaction. It used to be there. You wouldn't have married him or her if it wasn't. Or at least I hope you wouldn't have. And so make the effort to recall and to recall all of those things that made you want to drop everything to just spend time with your spouse before you got married, and keep that fresh and alive. Don't let your marriage or any relationship for that matter just evolve. It has to be preserved and worked on, I should say, and invested in. Think about it. How long has it been since you looked at your husband or your wife and felt that exhilaration that you felt when you were first seeing each other? One of the most common mistakes people can make after getting married is that they stop trying to keep each other captivated. Before marriage, it's all about doing your best and to make the right impression and steal their heart. But after you've done that and the ring is on the finger, we can easily find ourselves just taking our spouse for granted. Now, of course, we do change as we get older, not only physically, but also in other ways. But this is no reason to forget to remember about continually focusing on what is attractive about our spouse. And I'm not talking about looks alone, although, that might be part of it. I'm talking about those inner qualities that attracted you to him or her in the first place. Most people have got no problem understanding that to keep improving at whatever they do, they need to keep training and practicing to improve. Well, guess what? A marriage is no different. It needs to be constantly worked on so that it becomes better and stronger. And of course, as you get older, things change. You become more familiar. And that's not necessarily bad, so long as you keep what's important fresh and alive and improving. One final point on this: don't be selfish to each other. In other words, if you know that something is important to your spouse, then be willing to die a little to yourself so your spouse can have what is important for them. Don't wear out the too tired or can't be bothered excuses. Make an effort to do or say what blesses your spouse. It might mean doing something that you don't want to or feel like. But that's what Christianity is all about. It's about dying to self so that someone else can benefit. And that's just as true in the home as what it is in the church and what it is out in our community. Selfless love is not expressed by only doing what you want. It's about doing what your spouse wants or needs. Now, the second key to staying together is to stay together. The Bible is clear that the marriage relationship is to be permanent and the bedrock foundation for families to be built upon. We can never build strong families, and we can't improve the basic building block of society without a commitment to the establishment and development of lasting and satisfying marriages. When you're married and the world tries to pull you apart, don't forget your vows. Stay together, work it out, make necessary compromises, get some help if you need to, respect each other's perspectives. You don't have to think the same way, but you have to respect each other's thoughts. And so pray and talk and try again, but stay together if at all possible. And of course, I know that sometimes there are, extenuating circumstances, but if at all possible, stick it out and make it work. Truth is that most marriages fail because couples fail to keep their vows, and they fail to hang in long enough to work out the things that need to be worked out in their marriages. If you don't work out the personal issues that come up and that are contributing to failed relationships, then you're only going to take them into the next relationship and fail there as well, as we see happen so often. Whatever has happened in the past, make the most of your marriage, because strong families flow out of solid marriage relationships. Relationships that will last till death do us part. Remember that part that you said on your wedding day? Believe it or not, the only way a genuine Christian marriage will fail is if you leave God out of it. I absolutely believe that. And I'm not talking as someone that's had a rosy marriage all my life. 10 years into our marriage, the only thing keeping Bernie and I together were our kids. So we've been there. We know what it's like to feel like we'd be better off without each other. But we stuck it out. And we let God in. And He helped us sort out the issues. And so when I say that with God all things are possible, I have experienced that. Amen? Now, another vital key for making a marriage last is to stay faithful to it. Now, of course, faithfulness in a marriage covers a whole, bunch of areas, and it's not restricted only to sexual fidelity, but sexual faithfulness is certainly vital, because Jesus made the point that unfaithfulness in this area is the only reason that he will excuse divorce and remarriage among his people. So yeah, it must be a big thing. Unfaithfulness doesn't just destroy a marriage, of course. It can also destroy the adulterer himself, as we see in Proverbs 6:32 and 33. But the man who commits adultery is an utter fool, for he destroys himself. He will be wounded and disgraced. His shame will never be erased. Incidentally, ladies, this is not exclusive for men, because women do commit adultery as well. And so the same will apply if it's a woman committing the adultery. And it doesn't get any clearer than this. The wisest man ever who wrote Proverbs says that only fools will do it, and so just don't do it. Take the possibility of adultery off the radar screens of options in your mind. Make it something that is just simply out of the question. One of the things that Bernie and I committed to never do is to use the word divorce. Even when we're not going very well, we never ever threaten each other with that word. And one thing that we were always sure of, even though we were struggling, is that we were faithful to each other. People who commit adultery not only destroy themselves with guilt and shame, but you know what? They actually end up destroying their spouse and their family in the process, and often they end up destroying some other family as well. You know what? On a practical note, I've never met one person who gave in to the temptation and actually committed adultery who was later glad about it. Most end up regretting it. Soon enough, adultery will always be followed by regret. You can bank on that. We never walk away scot-free from breaking our marriage vows. There are always widespread repercussions. In a moment of madness, it's like, throwing everything away for a moment of temporary pleasure. Anything that threatens or weakens a marriage, anything that could potentially undermine a marriage, should just be nipped in the bud and not allowed to grow. Never underestimate the power of temptation or the power of seduction, even in a strong marriage. You got to remember that the devil will use whatever he can to try to take you out, to try to mess with your life and destroy you if he can. But he's not going to show up in person and beat you up. He's going to try to manipulate you and control you and make you make bad decisions. The truth is that when we sometimes feel our strongest, that's sometimes when we're actually the most vulnerable. And St. Paul warns us about this in 1 Corinthians 10, verse 12. If you think you're standing strong, be careful not to fall. It seems that, many people these days have gone into marriage with an exit plan already in place. They're starting their marriage with the exit plan. Now, with the rich and famous, this is pretty common. They usually call these prenuptial agreements. But as Christians, we should be living at a different level. And for us, we need to remember this, that when you get married, marry carefully, because God's will is for your marriage to be permanent. Don't ever go into a situation, I've got some red flags going on, but I'm sure that with God we can sort them out, or I'm sure I'll be able to train him or train her or whatever. Man, just don't go there. If that's how you're starting off, don't go there. Truth is that when a Christian couple divorces, it's only because one or both of them stop honoring their vows and refuse to deal with the issues that are driving them apart. I've done a lot of marriage counseling over the years, and it's always the same thing. People just refuse to deal with the issues that need to be dealt with. They dig their toes in. They wait for their spouse to change before they change. Folks, that just doesn't work. When when God said that the two will become one flesh, it really means that. You become one person, so don't treat each other as individuals with your own problems. Every problem you have is your together problem. So deal with it together. If marital troubles arise, as they do, anyone here ever had marital troubles? Oh, 3 honest people, sweet. When they arise, then take them to God, because He wants you to stay together. But if you do that, you also have to want to deal with those issues as well. You have to be willing to invite God into the problem areas and then follow His lead. So in recapping, the first vital ingredient for a strong family is a strong marriage. And with God in your marriage, then I believe you can certainly stay faithful and stay strong. Most marriages usually tend to produce children. And so the next vital ingredient for building a strong family is to adopt effective parenting skills. When children come into a family, believe it or not, they're not usually passive. I mean, they're tiny and you think they're just so sweet, nothing can go wrong here. They're just like that little doll I used to play with that you could put away when you're finished. No, they're not passive. Instead, they're quite disruptive. Bless their little hearts. Most parents can't wait for the kids to grow up because they think that they're going to become less demanding. From my experience, that only happens when they actually move out. And even then, from my experience, that can be debatable. In any case, there is going to come a day when you don't have to remind your child to clean their room, to eat all their vegetables, or to pick up after themselves. Because there'll come a day when that child is just simply going to not be in your house. Some of you might be hoping that happens real soon. Trust me, one day you'll look back and wonder where the time went with your kids. And you're going to wish that you had more. Even though I've fathered 5 children who I think still love me, I am far from an expert. Aww. My daughter's mouthing, I love you. Thank you. So even though I've managed to not kill any of my 5 children, I'm far from an expert. But I have learned a few things, and again, as with marriage, I just wish that I'd learned them much earlier than I did. In any case, my point is that no matter where you're at, waiting for your kids to leave home, or waiting for your kids to arrive, or even waiting for a spouse to have them with, we need to make sure that we do the best that we can as parents now, or as parents to be. And the first key in this regard is to view your kids as a gift from God. And I think this applies to, not just, young parents with young children, but even our older ones. Some of you here are looking like dinosaurs. I get that. I'm right on your tail there. But we still have kids, and we're still their parents. And so this will apply to us as much as it does to a younger family. And as I look around, I know that this sermon today is more applicable for younger families, but I don't think it'll hurt us older ones to hear the truth again. And we can always apply what we missed with our kids to our grandkids. True? We always take care of what we value. And the most valuable gift that God can possibly give us is, in fact, children. We're blessed to have a few toddlers in the house and some babies on the way, and perhaps some in the planning stages or the wish list. And so while this may not apply to some of you older ones who've been there, done that, it may apply to some others, and perhaps some who might be watching on our channel. That precious child that you have or will have in your possession has been given to you as a gift. And you need to treat him or her as the most precious gift that you've ever received. Sometimes we don't realize this until later. I'm encouraging you to realize it now. Don't wait till you get older or become grandparents to just realize this. Do it now. Enjoy the benefits now. Change your attitude about your children now. Whether you gave birth to them or adopted them, they've been given to you by God's grace, and you are responsible for caring for them the best way possible. Don't miss the opportunities, because before you know it, I'm telling you, they're going to be having kids of their own. And you'll wonder what happened to the years in between, as I am these days. Next, view your kids as adults in the making. This is where many of us can get it wrong. We treat our kids like less than fully human. Having said that, I can understand why we do that, because at times they surely can behave like non-humans. But the truth is that the child that has been given to you from God will one day be an adult. How we care for them today will have a huge effect on who they will be tomorrow. Very often we can treat our kids with less respect than we should. Just because they're not adults doesn't mean that they don't deserve our respect. Now, of course, it's hard to respect a child that's very undisciplined and obnoxious, but this is where two particular aspects we need to pay attention to are vital. And these are love and discipline. One without the other will never work well. I've known some parents who major on the love while completely neglecting the discipline, and then others major on the discipline while neglecting showing a generous demonstration of love. Neither way is actually balanced, and neither way will produce the right outcome. One thing is certain: if you want to have respect for your child and have them enjoy the respect of others, then you have to train them so that they can be respected. Does that make sense? It's quiet in the house. And you know what? We can do this by a combination of both love and discipline. Thankfully, there's a proverb to ponder upon this morning that spells out the idea of this combination of love and discipline and how we need balance here. Let's go to Proverbs 13, verse 24. Those who spare the rod of discipline hate their children. Those who love their children care enough to discipline them. Now, the problem with this verse that I have found whenever it's come up, quite often, is that most people only see the word rod standing out, and so they tend to stumble on that. Those that don't believe in physical punishment disregard it because they think it conflicts with what they believe. But what do they believe? What do these people think this kind of rod is? What do they think physical punishment is? Do they see the rod as a whip, as a belt, as a club to crack heads and bruise and break bones? For goodness sake, that is not what God means by the rod of discipline. Of course, those that agree that a good smack is the way to go may also stumble over it because they see the rod as the only way to go, the only way to discipline your kids. And at the wrong end of the scale are those who might see the rod as some kind of severe weapon that they should use that corrects behavior by sheer fear or by inflicting serious pain. Well, both extremes are wrong, because the point of the proverb and the emphasis that we should all put on this proverb is not on the rod, but on the word discipline. Because the rod is simply a tool to achieve discipline. The goal in parenting is not to use the rod, the goal is to achieve discipline. And even then, we would do well to see the meaning of this word discipline as simply meaning corrective training. We should think of the word rod simply as a tool for behavior training. the tool of, whatever it takes to produce the best correction outcome. Now, I'm not saying that a smack is not appropriate. In fact, sometimes it's the only thing that may work with some kids, especially little ones. But what do you think a smack is? That is a smack. A smack is not something that sends the kid flying across the room. Please make sure you understand what a biblical godly smack is. If you're dealing with a toddler, that's enough. It's enough to show them you're not happy with their behavior. One thing I learned, of course, is that you can't use the same form of correction on every kid because they are different. Correction must also be age appropriate. A tap will work on a toddler, but it's not going to work on a teenager. With older kids, a far more effective tool may be taking their phone or their iPad away for a while, banning sleepovers or sleep-ins or some other kind of favorite activity. That's going to work much better than a tap. The truth is that producing disciplined children takes all forms. But in particular, when they're little, you definitely have less options. What's needed in every case is a way to let them feel that there is a cost to pay for their negative behavior. In disciplining your child, you have to somehow find a way to communicate that the behavior is not acceptable, that's not approved of. That's what training your child means. That's what the rod really means. It's whatever means that you can find that will communicate that to your child. Your behavior is not acceptable, and this is what I'm doing to make you aware of that. Now, for a little toddler, a tap is all that is usually needed just to show them that you are disapproving of their behavior. Anyone that does more than this to a toddler is going too far. You can't use this scripture to justify any more than that. And we see cases all the time where kids end up being killed because they've been shaken to death or just simply absolutely brutalized. That's not disciplining. That's abusing. If you want your discipline to work effectively, whatever form it is, it must teach your child that there are consequences for bad behavior. It's not you doing it, it's them bringing it upon themselves. In your disciplining, you have to communicate that to your kids. Hang on, this is happening because you did this. Not this is happening because I'm not happy about it, or this is happening because you made mommy angry. No, this is happening because you did this. You have to communicate to your children that there is consequences for bad behavior. Having said that, don't ever mistake childish, irresponsible behavior that should be overlooked with open rebellion that should not be overlooked. No one can afford to put discipline measures on hold while their child gets old enough for other methods to work. By then, you know what? You've just lost ground that you may never make up. If little Johnny is going berserk and a smack is the only option you've got left, then so be it. Because to do nothing will certainly not help him. And some people might be disgusted that such a thing could be heard from the pulpit. But you know what? I've got God's support on that comment I've just made. And here is a proverb to ponder in this regard. Proverbs 23, verse 13 and 14. Don't fail to discipline your children. They won't die if you spank them. Who would have known? Verse 14. Physical discipline may well save them from death. If you allow your child to ignore you when you speak to them, when you say, Johnny, stop, and they just ignore you, and you allow them to ignore you, what do you think might happen when they're about to cross the road and you say, Johnny, stop, and he ignores you? Now, whatever you think the rod in Proverbs 13:24 is, it is definitely not words. It is some kind of physical connection. The big deal against smacking a child is that some people associate a little smack used to bring correction or demonstrate consequences with abuse or brutality, and that's just ridiculous. They say, if you physically discipline your children, you're going to produce angry, violent adults. So why is it that violence and all kinds of crazy things are happening more now that we have not been disciplining our children than what happened in the days of my parents? Can smacking be brutal abuse? Of course it can. But that's not at all the rod of discipline that the Bible is meaning. It's also true that with some rare kids, smacking is either simply not necessary or it's just plain doesn't work. I've had both scenarios in my own home. One of my kids preferred smacking because it bothered it the least. And I'm saying it because I don't want to let anyone out of the bag. It person used to suggest smacking so that we didn't think of some other form of discipline. It would even go and get the wooden spoon for us to use. For it, a spanking was quick and out of the way. And it liked it that way. But give it some time out on its own, and for it, that was like torture. With one of the others, just the threat of a smack was enough to change behavior and attitudes. In any case, discipline is basically the correcting of wrong behavior so that it's replaced with right behavior. That's the purpose. That's the end game of disciplining our children. And so we have to use what works best to achieve the purpose for that particular child. Disciplining a child should never be about taking out your frustration on them because of their bad behavior. That's when it potentially can turn into abuse. And here's what happens between a parent that doesn't discipline their child and one that does. Little Johnny's going berserk and mom's ignoring him. And he's carrying on and it's getting worse, and mom is saying don't do this and he's ignoring it, and mom's saying don't do this and he's ignoring it, and mom's saying don't do this and he's ignoring it, and he just carries on breaking things and making a big mess, and mom's just getting more frustrated, and eventually she acts. And she's now acting at the peak of her frustration. How is she likely to behave at the peak of her frustration compared to the mother that usually disciplines a child? Johnny, you do that and this is going to happen. And Johnny knows that mom's for real because the last time this happened, Johnny experienced the consequences. And so Johnny comes into the line by the time mom warns him 2 or 3 times. Johnny is no longer misbehaving because he knows that mom needs business. So mom is acting at very low frustration level because she's trained Johnny to respond to her threats. This mom, by the time she responds, she is like over the top. Does that make sense? That's the difference between someone who disciplines their child and someone who doesn't. Here's the hard pill to swallow for some parents. If you do not discipline your children according to the Bible, you do not love them, as we saw in Proverbs 13:24. How does a lack of discipline turn to hate? I had to once ask God to explain this to me, and He did, and so let me share it with you. Even if your children are unruly, undisciplined, and maybe even absolutely obnoxious, you know what? You're going to tolerate them because they're your kids and you love them. They're little monsters, but you still love them. But guess what? Others won't feel the same way about them as you do. And one of the worst things that we can subject our kids to is rejection. And if we fail to discipline our kids, you can bet that they will be rejected by others because of their behavior. And in fact, even the parent may reject that child because of their behavior, or express a sense of rejection because of their behavior. And if we don't protect them from that, if we don't protect our children from rejection, either ours or others, then we may think that we love them, but our love is lacking greatly, because Proverbs says that we hate them if we refuse to properly train them. And I agree with that. Furthermore, if you don't discipline your children when they're young, you increase the risk of having the police and the courts do it for you when they get older. And isn't that happening all the time now? We see this happening these days more than ever before. Guess why that is? Because society has taken discipline measures out of schools, and they are shaming parents for doing it in the home. That's why. Things are not getting better. Humanity is not improving because of our intelligence and technology. And so my point is that we need to find a way that works best, but a way we must find for the sake of our children. Yes, our children deserve our respect, but we have to train them so that we and others can indeed respect them. You can't have a strong marriage and a happy home if your kids are out of control. They will become a source of disunity and anxiety in the home, and possibly even become a wedge behind you. And I can promise you this, many divorces have happened because of the kids. And not because of infidelity or adultery or any other thing like that, but because the parents can't agree on how to discipline their kids. Is discipline hard work? Yes, it is. But is it worth it? Absolutely. If you don't do it in the early years, you're going to be fighting all the way until the day they leave home. The next thing that helps is to view your kids as clones of yourselves. It's easy to look into the faces of our kids and see physical resemblance there. But we need to keep in mind that when they grow up, they're going to display some of their mums and dads' behaviors. And while they have the free will to choose how they will behave when they get older, we need to do our very best we can to model what we want them to become. Proverbs 20 verse 7 says, "The godly walk with integrity, blessed are their children who follow them." So a pondering question is, where are your kids following you? What are you teaching them to imitate about you? Because the blessing implied here is that if your walk is righteous, your children will be blessed as they follow you and your example of integrity. If we do not live lives of integrity, can we possibly expect our children to do any better than the example that we have set? In many ways, our children are a mirror of ourselves. If we lack discipline, we're going to have some trouble teaching our children to be disciplined. Unfortunately, with children, we have precious little time to influence them. Before we know it, there'll be a whole gang of other worldly influences in their lives, and most of them will be truly ungodly. Fortunately, we have a great promise from Proverbs to ponder on. Proverbs 22, verse 6. "Direct your children onto the right path, and when they are older, they will not leave it." Now, while this is not a promise that children will keep the faith of their parents, it is a general statement of truth that most likely they will. Sadly, God never does anything to take away our free will, and some of our children may use that free will to just make really bad choices, even when we have taught them otherwise. We cannot control the decisions that our children make as they get older, but we can do what the Word of God tells us concerning them, and that is to set the best example possible in the here and now. I've got a couple of kids that aren't following the Lord, but you know what? They're living okay lives. They're living good lives, So they may not have accepted our faith, but they've accepted our principles for living, and I'm grateful for that. I was not raised in a happy home. In fact, it was far from a happy home. And frankly, I was afraid of getting married and ending up in a similar situation. When I met Bernie, I thought that with her it would be different. And so we got married. I proposed, she said yes. But then I was afraid of having kids because I didn't know how to bring them up. All that I knew was that I didn't want to do it the way my father did. Then I watched the series called Focus on the Family by Dr. James Dobson, and it encouraged me to believe that with God's principles, a family can be happy and that wholesome kids could be raised. And so I lost my fear of having kids. Clearly, I lost all fear, considering we ended up with 5 of them. Can I have the team up, please? Now, I know much of what I said today will feel irrelevant for you older folks, but I know that we are in for a season of babies. And that's what happens when young couples get married, and we have a few in the house who are not yet parents, and so I hope that this will help them. And the other thing too, folks, is you've got to remember that some of our folks have come from overseas and they don't have their parents here. And as a church family, we can be parents to them. And so just because, you may not have your own children anymore, or they might have moved away, just remember we do have young families in our midst that are missing their parents. And so it's okay for you to step in and be that helping parent. Is that all right? We can do that? A happy home is possible. Just establish a strong marriage and work on effective parenting practices and you will have a happy home. A perfect home? No. It won't be perfect because you know what? You'll be in it. Will it be a home that never has any problems? No, not that either, because God has already told us that in this life we will have problems. But if you cherish God's Word, even when it challenges your thinking, and you do your best to apply it to your family life and maintain a home that honors God, then you will have the best chance of being successful in a world that appears to be doing everything it can to sabotage the family unit. The more we're willing to accept that God knows what's best for us, and the more we're willing to live by the way He suggests, the stronger, better, and happier our lives will be. And all of God's people said, Amen. God bless you.